Welcome back to the Artie Lange Show. I'm talking with Scott Freiman, who travels the country doing lectures about the Beatles, the importance of the Beatles and their music. You know, there's something else about the Beatles. They're such a huge band. That's another thing about them. It's just they're such a big deal that their music is so far-reaching. You know, a lot of younger people don't even realize some songs that they know are them.
Right.
And sometimes to me, you need the Beatles. Like I have my iPod has every Beatles tune on it. And after Hurricane Sandy, we were up here in Hoboken for like 3 days, me and my girlfriend. Then we drove down to Philly to a hotel, and when we got in the car and we had been through all that for a few days and you saw a lot of hell and everything, I said, you know what, we need the Beatles right now. She goes, what are you talking about? And I put Here Comes the Sun on. It was like a perfect thing. And she goes, this is the Beatles? She goes, I love this song. This is the and she's 29 years old. So, you know, they're that much of an impact.
Well, my lectures, I get 5, 6, 7-year-old kids.
Right.
I get 80, 90-year-old grandparents bringing their great-grandkids. I get college students. I get people who grew up with the Beatles. I get people like my parents who were there when the Beatles were out, but they were still listening to their Sinatra records. They totally missed it.
Right.
And they're all sitting in the same room listening to this great music together. And you can't pick another group. You know, people say, who else would you deconstruct? And anyone from the Stones to Michael Jackson, the Queen, to anyone, you'll find a segment of people who really love the group, but you won't find that span of ages that you do with the Beatles.
Stones are a little too edgy to do that.
Yeah,
with.
I think so.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Even though I love them, but I hear what you're saying. So give me the gist of like the White Album lecture. What do you do?
So the White Album, that's a really interesting time,
right?
Because the Beatles were sort of fracturing. Their manager had died, and they had gotten into meditation. They decided they're going to go to India, and this trip is going to get them back to, you know, the spiritual life. They're going to be all together, and what it ends up doing really is driving a wedge between everyone. In fact, they write all these incredible songs while they're in India, but independently. John's writing over here, Paul's writing over there, George is writing, and so they come back from India now with all of these great songs, and they go over to George Harrison's house and they record a demo.
Right.
It's like the Beatles unplugged. So I play some of that in my show. It's just really cool to hear them before they get into the studio and things get produced.
Yeah.
But the Yoko's now part of the group, and so John and Yoko are off doing whatever they're doing, Revolution 9 and things. Paul's trying to hold things together. He's turning off song after song. George has all this material. He feels no one's paying attention to him. He gets upset. Ringo quits the band. So it's this very tumultuous time, and yet they come out with this incredibly classic album.
Right.
Every genre of music you can find in there. A lot of people say, you know, the birth of heavy metal is on that album with Helter Skelter.
Right.
You have country rock and jazz rock and Broadway and orchestral music, all on one album. You know, think of other albums that have that span, and every song is fun to listen to. Every song is great.
How is Charles Manson, if at all, related to the Beatles?
A second cousin. No.
No, but I mean, he never. There was never. I know he lived with one of the Beach Boys for a while and wrote songs. Neil Young supposedly came in contact with him and thought he was talented on some level. But there's a folk legend where he got turned down by the Beatles with music or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. There might be a story where he sent a tape to Apple Records when Apple was soliciting things. I'm not sure about that, but I know, you know, he was just like so many people reading things into the lyrics. Not everyone.
And Helter Skelter supposedly is what he thought. Like the big war.
The
was
race
coming
riots,
up,
right? He thought the White Album specifically was speaking to him about race riots to come, and Charles was supposed to go out there and instigate this. You know, the Beatles always had problems with people interpreting the lyrics. You know, take a song like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Everyone said, well, that's LSD, Lucy, Sky, Diamonds. It was a kid's picture of, you know, John's kid came home from school with a picture. Everyone there, you know, verifies it. If they wanted to say it was about LSD, they would have said it was about LSD.
Yeah, why not? That wouldn't matter to them.
That's right. That's right. They'd all admitted they were using it by that point. But every song, as we do today, you know, we read all this stuff. Well, maybe he was talking about this person or that person, and I think Manson was just an extreme. Unfortunately,
John Lennon is the one who got into heroin, right?
That's right.
He was addicted to heroin for a while.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was something that started around the time he met Yoko, around the White Album, and then he came off of it, and that's sort of what Cold Turkey is about. The song, one of his first singles, and yeah. So John tried different things.
You see, unfortunately, like it's great to have artists like that try stuff to get their viewpoint on it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I hate that he had to go through that, but it's great that someone like him did, because he could write about a guy like him could write about it like nobody else can.
Right.
You know?
Well, the great artists take the things that they've experienced and turn it into something that all of us can appreciate, right?
Right.
And Lennon was a master at that. You know?
Yeah. I don't know if you ever heard Howard Stern's interview with Paul McCartney from '01. I had just joined the show, and he was putting together the concert for New York after 9/11, and he came in, and Howard did an hour-long interview with him, and I was sitting in the studio like stunned. It was amazing. Paul McCartney was sitting 3 feet from me. I had gotten a job a few weeks before, and I was just sitting there listening to the two guys, and it's the best interview I've ever heard McCartney do. And I don't know if you heard what. I want to know if you know anything that makes this make sense. But McCartney claimed that Yoko Ono had come to his apartment first and wanted to buy stuff like the original lyrics to something, maybe Day in the Life or whatever, or I Want to Hold Your Hand or something, to auction off. She said she was part of a charity.
Right.
And McCartney thought she was a joke. And as a joke, sent her to Lennon's apartment and said, "Oh, my partner John would love this." And did it as a joke, thinking he'd blow her off. He wanted to annoy John Lennon with her because she was annoying him. And like 4 days later, John Lennon called him up and said, "I met the most brilliant woman and I'm in love with her." Does that seem?
Well, it's sort of mashed together a little closer. The time span was a little longer. But,
I bring her up because she's just a major part of what happened to
absolutely.
that band. Yeah.
Well, you know, people don't realize that Yoko was an artist in her own right. I mean, she was experimental. She was doing avant-garde stuff. She was hanging out with some people like Ornette Coleman, you know, the great jazz player. She was, and the auction she was raising money for, I believe, had to do with John Cage. She was trying to do a birthday present or something for John Cage.
Right.
And in fact, a lot of the lyrics of Beatles songs were given to John Cage.
Right.
So that's why she first approached Paul. And Paul was the most into avant-garde of the Beatles. You know, again, John gets the credit for that, but Paul was the one who was hanging out with all the avant-garde artists. He helped to set up the Indigo Gallery in London, which was the center place for avant-garde and for all the great modern writers and filmmakers and so forth. This was Paul's world. And so it was natural for Yoko to want to approach Paul first because he was the guy who was into art the most.
Right.
I mean, John Lennon famously dismissed avant-garde with a vulgar expression, and that changed when Yoko kind of opened up his eyes. But, you know, I think she, obviously history has been kinder to her over time, but I think she did an awful lot for Lennon. I mean, Lennon was someone who needed someone providing him some direction, someone who he could really trust as an equal. And clearly, Paul and John over time were starting to grow more and more distant. And I think Yoko provided, you know, a substitute for him.
Right. Yeah. He was definitely a lost soul, I think, without her in a lot of ways. Like that amazing story about they got into a fight and he went to L.A. for that famous like lost weekend.
Right.